Today's story is one you won't forget. It's not just about a luxury sailboat or a public confrontation. It's about dignity, redemption, and the quiet power of standing your ground. Join us as we dive into The Red Sail, where Karoline Leavitt, America's youngest White House press secretary, faces political bias head-on, and her husband Nicholas Riccio turns humiliation into an unforgettable lesson. The late afternoon sun stretched long ribbons of gold across the Atlantic as Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the polished wooden planks of Seabourn Marina. Salt clung to the breeze, mingling with the faint scent of varnish and engine oil. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer and cream blouse, still fresh from the White House press room, Karoline carried herself with a kind of quiet purpose. Her eyes scanned the rows of sailboats moored in the slips, each one sleek, glinting, and unapologetically expensive. But it was one vessel in particular that had brought her here, the Azure Wind 48, a limited edition sailboat known for its carbon fiber mast, Italian wood interior, and unmistakable deep blue hull. It wasn't just a boat, it was a statement. To Karoline, it represented freedom, resilience, and strength. Everything she'd fought for as the youngest White House press secretary in American history. Not just a political figure, she was a woman constantly under scrutiny, constantly underestimated. This boat wasn't just about leisure. It was about proving that strength could be graceful, and that even in the storm, she could steer her own course. A soft voice broke through the breeze. "Looking for something in particular, ma'am?" Jamie Wells, a young apprentice in a slightly oversized marina polo, approached with a mixture of enthusiasm and nerves. Karoline turned, her smile polite but firm. "Yes, the Azure Wind. I called earlier." Jamie nodded quickly, gesturing toward the display dock. "Right this way. It's just come back from a press cleaning." As they walked, Karoline noticed curriculous glances from a few marina staffers, recognition flickering behind their sunglasses. She was used to it. Her face had become synonymous with the administration's boldest press moments, her calm under fire both admired and reviled, depending on the audience. The Azure Wind awaited at the end of the dock, regal and still, its polished chrome fittings catching the sun. Karoline stepped aboard with practiced ease, running her hand along the smooth edge of the helm. Jamie began reciting specs: sail tension control, eco-friendly battery bank, onboard communication systems, but was cut off mid-sentence. "Jamie," came a voice behind them, sharp and authoritative. Silas Carrington, the marina's sales director, had arrived. Late 40s, salt and pepper beard, expensive sunglasses, the type of man who always looked like he was auditioning for a yacht commercial. His eyes swept over Karoline, lingering a bit too long on the small American flag pin she wore near her collar. "I'll take it from here," he said smoothly. Jamie stepped back, flustered. Karoline straightened her posture. The air shifted, the sales pitch was over, the judgment was beginning, and she felt it, the same chill she'd weathered in press rooms and power halls. But out here, under the open sky, Karoline hadn't come to retreat, she had come to claim. And Silas Carrington was about to learn, this wasn't just any customer. This was a storm in a silk blouse. Silas Carrington didn't hide the smirk curling at the corner of his mouth as he approached the Azure Wind. "This one's not for everyone," he said, his tone breezy but with an undercurrent of warning, as if Karoline had wandered somewhere she didn't belong. She met his gaze evenly. "I'm well aware. I'd like to see the interior." Silas chuckled, a sound more dismissive than amused. "And I'm sure you'd love to take a few selfies at the helm, right?" "MAGA," he said the acronym like it was toxic. Jamie, still hovering behind them, shifted awkwardly, clearly regretting not vanishing sooner. Karoline didn't flinch. She was no stranger to these passive-aggressive power games. She'd played them on bigger stages, in sharper suits, under hotter lights. "I didn't come here for a photo op," she replied calmly. "I came to buy a sailboat. This one." Silas crossed his arms, stepping between her and the cabin entrance. "Do you even know what this boat costs?" he asked, feigning genuine curiosity. "Or did you just come here on campaign fumes and headlines?" The insult was veiled, but Karoline had heard worse, sharper, screamed across crowded press rooms. "I know exactly what it costs," she said. and I'm prepared to pay in full." Silas tilted his head, suddenly performing for the few curious onlookers at neighboring slips. "Well, that's interesting. You see, we usually prefer our buyers to align with the values of our brand. Environment, inclusion, progress." He waved his hand vaguely toward the horizon, then let his eyes return to Karoline, like she had personally offended the tide. "Not exactly the calling cards of the Trump crowd, are they?" Karoline felt her jaw tighten, but her voice remained composed. "Is this a marina or a political litmus test?" Silas leaned in slightly, his breath tinged with espresso and disdain. "This is private property, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone whose presence might devalue the seaborne name." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "You wearing that little flag pin? It's not just fashion, it's a red flag." Around them, the marina's hum dulled. A couple paused mid-step. A man with a navy cap and sunglasses glanced their way. Jamie looked like he wanted to sink into the deck. Karoline inhaled sharply, her calm now iced with steel. "You're refusing to sell me a boat because of my politics?" Silas shrugged, unbothered. "Because of your brand. You represent division, not unity. And frankly, we don't want the seaborne name associated with another culture war headline. You want a sailboat? Try the Chesapeake." Karoline stepped back slightly, as if giving herself a moment to choose her words, or whether to choose war. She glanced down at the azure wind, then back up at Silas, her expression unreadable. "You know," she said, her voice like the first crack of thunder on an open sea, "I've faced down senators and networks who tried to bury me, but at least they were honest about what they hated. You hide your fear behind fake virtue. And you just made a very expensive mistake." Without waiting for a reply, she stepped off the boat, heels clicking sharply against the dock, each step a quiet declaration. Silas watched her go, smugness returning as he called out, "Give my regards to the Freedom Caucus." A few snickers floated from the far end of the pier. Karoline didn't turn around. But as she reached her car and slid into the driver's seat, she took one last look at the azure wind glinting in the sunlight, not defeated. Calculating. The storm hadn't passed. It had just shifted course. The soft hum of the SUV's engine was the only sound as Karoline guided the wheel with steady hands, her eyes fixed on the winding Rhode Island road ahead. The late afternoon light streamed through the trees, dappling the dashboard in gold, but there was no warmth in her chest, just a slow, smoldering fury. She had been called many things in her time as press secretary, spin artist, mouthpiece, even propagandist, but never before had someone looked her dead in the eye and told her she wasn't welcome. Not because of anything she said, just because of who she was. Silas Carrington hadn't denied her a product. He'd tried to deny her identity. Karoline kept her posture upright, but her thoughts roiled beneath the surface like a storm building over the water. She could have fought back, could have lit him up right there on the dock with a precise verbal demolition. She'd done it to hostile journalists on national television. But something in her said, "Wait." She glanced at her phone on the center console, hesitated for a second, then tapped Nicholas's name. The call rang once, twice, then his familiar voice, gravelly, composed, answered, "Karoline?" That one word undid something in her. "I was just thrown out of Seabourn Marina," she said evenly, keeping her voice from cracking. "They recognized me. The sales director refused to even show me the boat." There was silence on the other end, and she could imagine her husband standing in their cliff-top home office, his hand tightening around a glass of whiskey. Did he say why? Nicholas's voice was low now, measured. "Because I'm MAGA," she replied. "Because of who I work for. He said I'd taint their brand." She swallowed hard. "He called my flag pin a red flag." Nicholas didn't respond immediately, but Karoline could hear the subtle creak of his chair, the tension building behind his silence. "What was his name?" he finally asked. "Silas Carrington," she said, her voice clipped. "He said he didn't want people like me around his boats." The silence returned, but this time it was different. Heavy, purposeful. And then Nicholas spoke, each word wrapped in steel. "Go home. I'll handle it." Karoline blinked at the road ahead. "Nicholas!" "No!" he cut in gently. "You've handled too much for too long. Let me make this one right." As she turned off the highway onto the quiet road leading home, a faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Not from amusement, but recognition. Nicholas wasn't just angry, he was activated. And when that happened, storms didn't roll in. They arrived in silence, with custom leather Intericis and million-dollar vengeance. The ocean outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Riccio estate churned beneath a bruised sky, waves crashing against the jagged cliffs of Newport like the thunderous pulse of a man trying to stay calm and failing. Nicholas Riccio stood barefoot in his office, a cavernous space carved from old stone and steel, its walls lined with architectural sketches and real estate contracts worth millions. In his right hand, a crystal tumbler of Balvenie scotch remained untouched, the amber liquid catching the gray light but offering no comfort. Karoline's voice still echoed in his ears. He said, "I taint their brand." That one sentence had stirred something ancient inside him, not just rage, but memory. Memory of nights spent on splintered benches along Hampton Beach, his ribs hollow, his coat soaked, dreaming of a life no one would ever hand him. Nicholas hadn't built Riccio Enterprises with favors or legacy. He'd built it from scratch, brick by brutal brick, and the only currency he ever trusted was action. He moved to the center of the room, placing the untouched drink on a table cluttered with property blueprints and a leather-bound notebook scrawled with acquisition strategies. Karoline's pain was his ignition. But this wasn't about anger? Not really. It was about lines. Lines that Silas Carrington had crossed, with a smug grin and a cheap sense of moral superiority. Nicholas had seen his type before. Men who'd inherited opportunity and mistook it for wisdom. Men who thought elegance came from exclusion. He exhaled sharply, his breath fogging the glass. Somewhere down in the private garage, nestled under sensor lights and velvet ropes, sat a deep red Rolls-Royce Phantom. The one he had commissioned the year their son Nico was born, painted in the exact shade of Karoline's MAGA pin, with a custom beige interior and chrome detailing that turned heads on Wall Street and Capitol Hill alike. Nicholas hadn't driven it in months. Tomorrow, it would have its moment. He reached for his phone, fingers moving with quiet precision as he texted his assistant to clear his morning. He didn't need a legal team. Didn't need headlines. What Silas needed wasn't cancellation, it was confrontation. Not with fury, but with fact. Nicholas didn't need to shout. His presence was the punctuation. He would walk through those marina doors not with threats, but with purchase orders. And when he left, Silas wouldn't just regret what he'd said. He'd understand why he was wrong. Because Karoline wasn't a symbol of division. She was the embodiment of grace under siege. She fought every day not to prove she was right, but that she belonged in rooms people tried to shut her out of. Nicholas turned from the window, his reflection distorted in the glass like a storm cloud with a jawline. He walked calmly toward the hallway, each step echoing through the stone corridors of the home he built with his own 2 hands. The gale outside howled louder now, slamming against the cliffs like applause for what was coming. Not revenge, not a scene, just a lesson, delivered with the quiet elegance of a man who had everything to lose once, and now would give everything to protect the woman who had given it meaning. The morning broke cold and sharp, a salty wind curling off the Atlantic as if the ocean itself sensed what was coming. At Seabourn Marina, the staff moved in their usual rhythm, buffing teak decks, adjusting mooring lines, and casually eyeing the few early customers. But the moment the red Rolls-Royce Phantom glided past the front gates, everything stopped. It wasn't just a car, it was presence. Gleaming like polished blood, the custom-painted Phantom rolled slowly down the marina's paved approach, its chrome accents catching the early sunlight in sharp glints. It didn't rev or roar, it purred, powerful and intentional, like a panther that didn't need to prove it could strike. Heads turned, phones came out, whispers spread. "Who the hell is that?" someone near the fuel dock muttered. No one answered. They were too busy watching. Silas Carrington stood near the polished railing of the showroom balcony, sipping a cappuccino and relishing the buzz of the morning crowd. He hadn't thought about Karoline Leavitt again after she'd walked off his dock the day before. another overhyped media personality trying to punch above her weight. He'd made his point. Seabourn had standards, but when he caught sight of the Phantom pulling up, his smile faltered. The car came to a deliberate stop just outside the main showroom entrance. The marina's valet reached instinctively for the door handle but hesitated. Something about the moment felt ceremonial. The door opened with a hiss of compressed air and out stepped Nicholas Riccio. Tall, broad, dressed in a dark tailored suit that hugged his shoulders like armor, his salt and pepper hair perfectly combed, his gaze forward and locked. If the car was a statement, the man who emerged from it was the closing argument. Conversations across the marina faltered to silence as he strode toward the glass entrance. The small brass chime above the door jingled weakly, almost embarrassed to announce someone like this. Inside, the showroom glowed under high-end lighting, all glass and gloss and engineered prestige. Silas turned slowly to face the entrance, his espresso suddenly tasting sour. He recognized the man from magazine covers and Forbes profiles. Nicholas Riccio, real estate tycoon, billionaire, and, more importantly, Karoline Leavitt's husband. Silas forced a smile, straightening his jacket as Nicholas approached. "Good morning, sir," he began, voice silked with uncertainty. "I'm Silas Carrington, Director of Sales. How can I help?" "I know who you are," Nicholas interrupted, his voice low and level. "You threw my wife out of this showroom yesterday." The words landed like stones dropped into a still pond. No anger, no theatrics, just cold, inarguable fact. Silence thickened. Jamie Wells, standing behind a desk nearby, looked up in alarm. Edgar Voss, the marina owner, peeked through the frosted glass office at the back, already sensing the tremor in the air. Silas opened his mouth, fumbling. "There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't..." Nicholas stepped forward, close enough for his presence to weigh on the room. "You told her she didn't belong, that her money was dirty. You disrespected her, not knowing who she is or who I am." His voice didn't rise, but it carried like a blade across velvet. "I'm not here for excuses. I'm here to buy the Azurwind, today." And then, after a long pause, he added, "And to make sure you remember who you dismissed so casually." All eyes in the showroom locked on Silas, his face drained of color, the smirk long gone. The red Phantom sat outside, its reflection gleaming in the showroom glass like a flare. The storm had arrived. And it was wearing cufflinks. Silas Carrington stood frozen, the showroom suddenly too bright, too exposed, as if every LED spotlight had been redirected to highlight his mistakes. Nicholas Riccio didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was measured, deliberate, and far more dangerous for it. "You looked my wife in the eye," Nicholas said, each syllable razor clean, and told her she didn't belong. That her money, earned through one of the hardest, most thankless jobs in this country, was dirty. You mocked her because of a pin, because of a name, because of a party. Nicholas took a step closer, not threatening but in full command. "But what you really mocked was integrity, hers and yours." The crowd that had quietly gathered around the Aston Martins and Bentleys was no longer pretending to browse. Customers, staff, even Edgar Voss, the marina's usually aloof owner, now stood silently at the edge of the confrontation. Some held phones lowered at their sides. Others simply stared. Jamie Wells gripped the edge of a sales desk, his face pale, eyes locked on the scene, as if witnessing a courtroom reckoning. Silas opened his mouth, but Nicholas raised a finger, not to shush, but to pause, as if permission to speak had been temporarily revoked. "You called her presence a liability," he continued, his voice like the slow pull of a tide before the wave crashes. "You saw a woman walking alone and assumed you could embarrass her, define her, deny her. But you didn't know who she is. Karoline Leavitt is the youngest White House press secretary in history. She faces networks, senators, and a nation of critics every day without flinching. And yet you, a man selling boats, thought she'd be easy to humiliate." The words hung heavy. Silas's mouth moved, his voice trying to catch up with the gravity of the moment. "Mr. Riccio, Look, we have the right to refuse service. Nicholas nodded once. You do. And I have the right to remember who exercises that right based on bias, not behavior. His tone sharpened. You didn't refuse service because she was disrespectful, or because she couldn't afford it. You refused her because she wore a MAGA pin and had the audacity to walk in here with poise and purpose. That's not professionalism. That's cowardice dressed in politics. Edgar Voss finally stepped forward, his usually confident stride now cautious. Mr. Riccio, he began, I assure you this isn't how Seabourn Marina operates. We're proud to serve all clients, regardless of politics. His eyes flicked nervously toward Silas. There's clearly been a lapse in judgment. Nicholas didn't even look at him. His gaze remained locked on Silas. This is not a media stunt. I didn't bring cameras. I didn't tweet. I came here quietly to correct a man's mistake the same way it was made, in public. He turned slightly, gesturing to the Azure Wind 48 moored behind the showroom's panoramic windows. I'll be buying that boat, full price, today. Silas swallowed hard, nodding mechanically. Of course, I'll get the paperwork started. But Nicholas didn't let him off the hook just yet. You're not going to remember this moment because you lost a sale, he said calmly. You're going to remember it because you tried to decide who deserved to belong, and I'm here to remind you, you don't get to decide that. For a long second, no one moved. Then Nicholas turned toward the windows, walking away from the stunned silence with the same composure he'd walked in with. The Phantom glinted just outside, its crimson body now mirrored by the growing flush in Silas Carrington's face. The storm wasn't over. It had just made landfall. Silas Carrington had expected the storm to end with the sale, a handshake, a signature, maybe a tense nod. But Nicholas Riccio didn't come for a transaction, he came for a transformation. As Jamie returned with a clipboard of purchase forms, Nicholas took the pen, signed swiftly, then looked up, not at the boat, not at the paperwork, but directly at Silas. You think I came here to ruin you, he said plainly, but I didn't. Silas blinked, confused, waiting for the catch. If I wanted revenge, I'd buy this entire marina, fire you in front of your peers, and rebuild it under a new name by next quarter, Nicholas continued, voice as calm as if discussing weather. But that doesn't teach you anything. That just proves your fear, right? That power only belongs to people like me. The showroom was hushed now, as if everyone sensed a shift in tone. This wasn't punishment, it was a proposal. I'm giving you a different path, Nicholas said. Next month, my wife is hosting a Veterans Gala at the Rhode Island Maritime Center. It's not a political event. It's a community one. Real people, real sacrifice. You're going to be there. As a volunteer, Silas opened his mouth to protest, but Nicholas cut in, a hand raised just enough to silence him. You'll push wheelchairs, pour coffee, clean up tables, and you'll listen to people who don't live on coasts or sit in echo chambers. You'll meet the kind of people you thought you were shielding your brand from. The words weren't aggressive, they were clinical, carved from stone and fact. Edgar Voss, standing just behind Silas, cleared his throat. Mr. Riccio, I think we can arrange that. Nicholas turned his gaze toward the owner for the first time, sharp but not hostile. This isn't for your image, Edgar. It's for him. He pointed squarely at Silas, who now stood stiff, arms at his side, pride flickering in his eyes like a dying flame. You insulted my wife because of what she represents. I want you to see who she fights for, not from the deck of a yacht, but from the floor of a gala full of veterans who've lost more than a deal or a job. Silas swallowed, nodding slowly. There was no room to negotiate, and strangely, no desire to. The offer, humiliating though it may have felt, didn't come from spite, but from something more disarming. Conviction. Yes, sir, he said, the title involuntary. I'll be there. Nicholas stepped back, slipping the signed forms into Jamie's hands. Good, he said. Let that be the start of you earning back the respect you so easily threw away. As he turned to leave, the marina floor felt less like polished luxury and more like a courtroom that had just delivered a sentence, not for punishment, but for possibility. Redemption had been offered. Whether Silas could rise to meet it, only time would tell. The Rhode Island Maritime Center shimmered beneath strings of soft white lights, its waterfront promenade alive with laughter, conversation, and the quiet rhythm of waves lapping against the docks. Inside, the Veterans Gala was in full swing, an event that looked nothing like the caricature Silas Carrington had imagined. Red, white, and blue banners fluttered gently from the rafters, but there was no firebrand politics, no angry chants, just warmth. Tables were filled with veterans and their families, Gold Star parents, nurses, teachers, welders, and mechanics, the kind of people Silas rarely encountered in his curated world of yacht buyers and tech investors. He stood by the refreshment table, dressed not in a designer blazer but a simple black polo, a volunteer badge clipped to his chest. It was humbling, purposefully so. He'd already spent the evening pushing wheelchairs, refilling drinks, and clearing empty plates, and now he found himself listening, really listening, to stories of IED blasts, of military funerals, of coming home and finding nothing the same. They didn't ask about politics, they asked about favorite fishing spots, whether the chowder was too salty, and how his back was holding up from lifting so many folding chairs. Across the room, Karoline Leavitt stood near the stage, dressed in a sharp navy Buick dress, her iconic flag pin glinting under the chandelier. She wasn't making speeches tonight, just listening, shaking hands, laughing. She moved with grace, not as a politician but as a host deeply invested in every conversation. Silas watched her from a distance for a moment, struck not by her title, but by her presence. She wasn't here for a headline. She was home, and that unsettled something in him, not guilt, but awareness. His idea of people like her had never included moments like this. "Blake," a voice called cheerfully. Corporal Miles Jensen, a young veteran Silas had been assigned to assist for the evening. He wheeled himself closer, a half-eaten cupcake in hand. "You gotta come meet my fiancée. She wants to hear about the day I made you miss 5 shots in a row at the cornhole game." Silas laughed, genuinely this time. "I maintain the wind was against me," Miles snorted. It was indoors. As Silas turned to follow, he caught sight of Nicholas Riccio arriving beside Karoline, nodding with approval at the scene unfolding around them. The tycoon wasn't wearing judgment now, only scrutiny, the kind that measured follow-through. Silas straightened unconsciously. Later in the evening, Karoline approached him near the silent auction table. "Didn't think you'd show," she said, her tone light but laced with deeper meaning. Silas met her gaze. "Your husband didn't give me much choice," he replied with a sheepish grin. She glanced at the volunteer badge on his chest, then at Miles, now chatting animatedly nearby. "And?" she asked. Silas hesitated, then said, "I was wrong. About you, about all of this. It's not what I thought." Karoline gave a soft, almost tired smile. "It usually isn't." Then she nodded, not in forgiveness, but in recognition, a quiet kind of peace. And as she walked away to greet more guests, Silas Carrington remained still, watching the sails outside sway under the night wind, realizing he hadn't just stepped into a gala, he'd stepped out of his own narrative, and into something real. The night had mellowed into a hum of slow jazz and soft conversation, the Veterans Gala winding down as the scent of salt air drifted through the open terrace doors. Silas Carrington stood near the edge of the hall, nursing a glass of water and watching Corporal Miles Jensen laugh with a group of fellow servicemen. His volunteer badge had started to peel at the corners from all the movement, but he didn't care. Something inside him had shifted, subtly at first, then all at once. The stories he'd heard tonight weren't political, they were personal. Sacrifice wasn't red or blue, it just was. And standing here, among these people he once assumed had nothing in common with him, Silas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Small, in the best possible way. He turned to see Karoline approaching, her navy dress catching the low light, the flag pin still glinting with quiet defiance. She stopped a few feet from him, hands clasped lightly in front of her, expression calm but unreadable. Silas cleared his throat. "Miss Leavitt," he began, then paused. "Karoline, I wanted to say this face to face." She waited, giving him nothing to hide behind. "I was wrong, not just in how I treated you, but in how I saw you, how I saw everyone you represent. I let politics become a filter for humanity, and He stopped himself, shaking his head. "There's no excuse. I'm sorry." Karoline studied him for a long moment, her eyes not unkind but weighing something deeper. "You humiliated me," she said softly, "in front of a crowd, because you thought I didn't deserve to belong. That stings more than you think." Silas nodded, jaw clenched. "I know, and I'll carry that. I already am." She glanced at Miles, now waving at them with a crooked grin. "He speaks well of you," she added. "Said you're a terrible shot, but you try hard." Silas chuckled, then caught himself surprised by the sound. "He's something else." Karoline's gaze softened just enough to signal a shift. "I don't need you to grovel, Silas. I just need you to mean it." "I do," he said without hesitation. "I meant it the moment I realized the people I dismissed were the kindest ones in the room." She gave a faint nod, then extended a hand. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just acknowledgement. He shook it, firm, brief, and honest. And for the first time in a long time, Silas Carrington felt like he belonged. Not because he had earned it, but because he was finally willing to see the people who had. Nicholas Riccio stood by the terrace doors, one hand tucked casually in his pocket, the other cradling a tumbler of bourbon that he hadn't yet sipped. From across the room, he'd watched Silas Carrington navigate the evening, not with his usual swagger, but with a kind of quiet humility that, frankly, surprised him. The man who once sneered at his wife was now pouring coffee for veterans and listening more than he spoke. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was a start. As Silas stepped away from his conversation with Karoline and turned toward the exit, Nicholas intercepted him with a nod. "Walk with me," he said simply. They moved along the outer deck, the marina's moonlit waters whispering below. "You handled yourself better than I expected tonight," Nicholas said. "Better than yesterday, or the day before that." Silas nodded, unsure if it was a compliment or a setup. "I meant what I said to your wife," he replied. "I was wrong." Nicholas gave a short nod. "I know. So, here's what I'm offering." Silas looked up. Nicholas's gaze was sharp but no longer cold. "Riccio Enterprises needs to replace 5 executive fleet vehicles this quarter, high-end and fully customized. I'm giving you a chance to pitch for the contract." Silas blinked, stunned. "You'd trust me with that? After everything?" Nicholas's voice didn't waver. "This isn't about trust. It's about watching what people do after they've been given the mirror. You showed up, you worked, you learned something. That matters more than saving face." He paused, then added, "But don't confuse this with charity. You mess it up, there won't be a second chance." Silas straightened, the weight of the offer and the responsibility settling into his chest. "I won't," he said. "I promise you." Nicholas turned back toward the hall, his silhouette outlined by the soft lights of the gala. "Good," he said. "Because real change isn't loud. It's what you do when nobody's clapping." Then, with one last glance over his shoulder, he added, "Pitch me next week. Impress me." And with that he disappeared inside, leaving Silas on the deck, wind in his hair, moonlight on his shoulders, and something he hadn't felt in a long time, a chance to rewrite the story. A week later, just past dawn, the Azure Wind 48 sliced through the still waters off Narragansett Bay, her midnight Puel hull skimming the ocean like a whisper. The breeze was light, steady, just enough to catch the sail and carry the vessel forward, leaving a gentle wake behind. Karoline Leavitt stood alone at the helm, her hair pulled back, her magapin replaced with a simple gold compass necklace, glinting in the early light. Her hands gripped the wheel, not out of tension but out of reverence. This was what peace felt like, not silence, but clarity. The kind that only came after standing your ground and weathering the storm without shouting, without breaking. As the sails billowed above her, she thought of everything that had led to this moment. Not just the humiliation on the dock, but the resolve it had sparked in her husband, and the quiet reckoning it forced upon a man who thought he could define worth by ideology. The boat wasn't just a purchase, it was a message. Not to the media, not to Silas Carrington, not even to the left-leaning elites who watched from a distance and judged her by headlines. It was a message to herself, that she belonged, that strength didn't have to be loud to be undeniable, that grace under fire didn't mean surrender. It meant choosing the higher road when you had every reason not to. She had walked away from that marina humiliated, yes, but not defeated. Because she had Nicholas, because she had a core that didn't crack, even under pressure, and because she knew the truth. Belonging doesn't come from permission, it comes from presence. The shoreline shimmered in the distance as she adjusted the sail, the boat catching a stronger gust. The azure wind responded beautifully, leaning into the wind with power and elegance, just like she had. Karoline smiled, not from pride, but from peace. Somewhere behind her, Nicholas would be watching from the cliffs, coffee in hand, knowing exactly what this sail meant. Not revenge, not even redemption, just movement, forward, unapologetic, free. And as the red trim of the sail caught the rising sun, it glowed like a quiet flame against the morning sky, bold, steady, and unmistakably hers. Because in the end it wasn't the car or the boat or the confrontation that defined Karoline Leavitt. It was the fact that no matter how many times someone told her she didn't belong, she showed up anyway. And she sailed forward. The story of the red sail is more than a clash of egos or a tale of political bias. It's a reflection on dignity, restraint, and the quiet power of principled action. Karoline Leavitt, faced with public humiliation for her beliefs, chose not to retaliate in anger but to stand firm in her worth. Through her calm defiance and her husband Nicholas's strategic response, the story reminds us that respect is not something given, it's earned by how we carry ourselves under pressure. The lesson here is clear. Real strength doesn't need to scream. It moves with purpose, acts with grace, and allows others the space to grow, even those who first brought harm. Nicholas didn't destroy Silas, he offered him a mirror, and in doing so, he transformed confrontation into an opportunity for redemption. In a world quick to cancel and slow to understand, the red sail teaches us that the most powerful victories come not from shouting louder, but from standing taller, calm, clear, and unshaken. True leadership isn't about dominance, it's about direction, and sometimes the most revolutionary thing we can do is quietly keep sailing forward.